Hello, business communication students. One of the first things that we're going to talk about with regard to putting together speeches, whether they're short speeches or longer speeches, would be the importance of having a great introduction and a great conclusion whenever you have verbal communication. There are some really fantastic tips that we're going to utilize to make sure that our introductions, whenever we give a speech, are fantastic and that our conclusions are equally fantastic whenever we're giving a speech. So first of all, there is something called the primacy recency effect, and with relationships to introductions and conclusions, an audience is more likely to remember the first and last items that are conveyed orally in a series than any of the items in the middle. So most often you remember the first and last things a speaker says, but you don't necessarily remember all of the information they give you in the middle. And so this is part of why it's so critical to have a really good introduction and a really good conclusion whenever you give a speech, no matter how long the speech is. So for your introduction, you have a couple of goals. First of all, you want to get the audience's attention. You also want the listener to have some kind of relevant statement involved so that the listener knows why they should be listening to you. Why is this relevant to their lives? How does this relate to them in any way? As a speaker, you want to make sure that you are credible and that you provide some kind of information that demonstrates your credibility to your audience. And then finally, you want to preview the main points or the thesis of your speech. So you want to make sure that in your introduction, you get the audience's attention, you tell them why they should be listening, you make sure that they understand that you know what you're talking about, and then finally, you prep them for the kinds of things you're going to be talking about in your speech. Introductions are typically 10 to 15% of the length of the entire speech, so they are not necessarily long. Good attention getters, that's the first part. You want to create an opening that's going to win your audience's attention. So you might use a quote, you might tell a short story, you might ask a rhetorical question. And remember, rhetorical questions are those things that people ask that they're not really expecting an answer. They're just asking you to start thinking about something. You might give some kind of startling or surprising fact or statistic. You might use humor as an attention getter, although this one is not recommended. This is actually lower down on the list for a really good reason. If you have yet to establish a relationship with your audience, frequently humor falls flat. So if you start out a speech by telling a joke, if the audience doesn't have a frame of reference for you, they're probably not going to get your joke. Finally, you could perform a task as a part of your attention getter where you do some kind of action or you show a video that's designed to capture the attention of your audience. Listener relevance is really some kind of statement that you make about how or why your speech relates to or affects your audience. Now, sometimes your attention getter does this for you, so you wouldn't need to include some kind of listener relevant statement if, when you're getting your audience's attention, you also indicate why the information is going to be important to them. In terms of credibility, credibility builds your authority or your expertise on a subject, and it convinces your audience that you're reliable and that you're credible and that you know what you're talking about. Sometimes, again, your attention getter does this for you. So if your attention getter is good, you don't need to then go ahead and establish more credibility. Anytime you use a statistic or a fact or a quote and you cite that, you are proving you researched your topic, which makes you credible. Finally, then, we want to be thinking about our conclusion and the goals of our conclusion. So the main two goals of a conclusion are to signal that we are wrapping up. So we're going to review our main points. And then finally, one of the important parts of a conclusion is including some kind of censure or call to action for your audience. Remember that a conclusion is seldom more than 5 to 10% of the length of an entire speech. So most of the time, your conclusion is pretty short. So how do you signal your conclusion and review your main points? Well, first of all, if it's a verbal, you might just say, in conclusion. Secondly, if it's nonverbal, you might slow down your speech rate. You might pause and then go ahead and step closer to your audience. It does establish a rapport, and it gives the audience a signal when you get closer to them that you are now going to be wrapping up providing additional information. You also want to make sure that you remind the audience of your main points. So you'd say something like, so in conclusion, we have discussed. So a clincher. A clincher is a 1 to 2 sentence statement that provides some kind of sense of closure. It's usually accomplished by providing some kind of attention getter that you discussed early. And you refer back to your attention getter in your conclusion, and it gives a nice sort of bookend effect on your speech. If you're doing a persuasive speech, you leave the audience with a call to action that really describes what it is you want your listeners to do. So, as an example here, an attention getter statement that also has listener relevance and provides credibility would be something like the following. Take a moment to think about 5 women in your life. Now imagine one of them having an eating disorder. This information came from Paula Kruger's July 20th, 2007 article titled 1 in 5 Girls Displayed Eating Disorder Behavior study that was found on an ABC News website. Learning about common eating disorders is crucial because according to the same article, the number of teenage girls with eating disorders has doubled in the past 6 years. So today, we'll take a closer look at 3 common eating disorders facing our nation: anorexia, bulimia, and obesity. Now, this is an example of an introduction that not only gets the audience's attention, it's relevant, it has credibility for the speaker, and it previews the points of the speech. An example of a good conclusion would be, in conclusion, today we've examined 3 common eating disorders: anorexia, bulimia, and obesity. Take a moment to think back to those 5 women in your life. How can you use the information that we learned today to hopefully identify and combat this growing problem? Now, we've taken some kind of clincher here where we're saying, go ahead and think back to that information we presented at the beginning and think about how this impacts your life in particular. All right, so that's really the end of this short introduction to introductions and conclusions in speeches. Now, after watching this, I would like you to go and look at the speeches that are highlighted in the Google Doc that's out on our classroom. You're going to be watching several speeches and writing some comments, answering some questions about each of those speeches as you go. Good luck and have fun.